Just when you may have thought it had reached the end of the road, the Brexit bandwagon rolls on. And still no one knows if there will be a deal between the European Union and the UK. Well, deadlines, it seems, can be ignored. Sunday passed and we were told that there are still extra miles to be travelled. Hello from me, David Foster. Still, we have to wonder what a deal, no deal will look like. Since talks are continuing, are they close to agreement or perhaps playing to their public on both sides of the channel? A no-deal Brexit, once thought unlikely by many and unthinkable by some, could now be just weeks away. After Britain formally left the EU on January the 31st this year, negotiators were given until the 1st of January 2021 to reach a deal governing trade. If they can, then annual business worth around $1 trillion can continue with minimal disruption. If not, then World Trade Organization terms will apply. That would mean tariffs on goods passing between the EU and the UK, and no preferential access to markets. But such a decision carries with it the risk of huge short-term disruption and economic damage. Analysis by the London School of Economics and the think tank UK in a Changing Europe says a no-deal Brexit will cost the UK economy $53 billion next year. The main sticking points are fishing rights, who gets to fish in UK waters, the so-called level playing field, how to make sure both sides play by the same rules, and how to resolve disputes, what happens if one side breaks those rules. After years of debate, the Brexit process has come down to the wire. Deal or no deal, the debate is likely to go on. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we can welcome to this round table Jonathan Liss, Deputy Director of the pro-EU think tank British Influence. In London as well, Robert Oulds, Director of the Bruges Group and author of Everything You Wanted to Know About the EU But Were Afraid to Ask. And in Birmingham, Alex de Ruyter, Professor at Birmingham City University, who's the Director of its Centre for Brexit Studies. Alex, I'm going to come to you first of all, since you are supposedly the only independent, if you like, on our panel. And the question is, was it always going to end this way? Although it hasn't officially ended, but was it always going to be stalemate at this time?
I don't think it was inevitable that it was going to be stalemate, but of course it did clearly depend upon the expectations of both negotiating parties and how they voiced them thereof. The EU have been pretty consistent from day one that a given level of market access would require a certain level of adherence to the Brussels EU regulatory framework. So for the UK, of course, with its extensive economic integration into Europe, that was always going to be problematic, because if the UK didn't want to be part of the single market and the customs union, then that in turn would pose certain trade barriers. Now, under Theresa May, of course, the solution that was somehow fudged was to effectively keep all of the UK in a customs union with the EU until such a point as to where the so-called Northern Irish backstop would cease to be an issue. But that was unacceptable to many in her own party of a more purist pro-Brexit slant, if you like. So that saw a replacement with Boris Johnson, who campaigned on a more avowedly pro-Brexit stance, who then won the party leadership and went to an election with the slogan "Get Brexit Done." He got an 80-seat majority and then proceeded to ratify withdrawal agreement, and then in the form of the political declaration, looking for a more limited free trade arrangement. So here we are now with the UK saying it wants a Canada-style free trade agreement of zero tariffs and zero quotas on goods, but the EU saying you're too large and important an economy next to us. If you pursue your right to make your own laws and deviate from our regulatory framework going forward, then that could result in unfair competition. So we would like some tie-ins to make sure that you have a certain level of regulatory alignment with us going forward. And that's where the
I
impasse
will
is.
ask you in a little while about stubbornness, about intransigence, but I'm going to go to our two other panelists. And Robert, you first of all. I believe you don't think there is such a thing as no deal.
No, essentially, even if there isn't a specific trade agreement, an all-encompassing deal, so to speak, that would be reached any day soon, perhaps, there would still be contingency measures that are put in place. There would be international agreements that are meant to keep trade open. And of course, the EU itself will put into play contingency measures, which will mean that trade can flow as freely as possible from designated ports of entry throughout the European Union. So really, there is going to be no cliff edge. These are all pejorative terms that are politically and linguistically loaded to try and produce an outcome. But essentially, the European Union will do its best, as will Britain, by making sure that flow more than checks is going to be prioritised at ports to make sure that goods continue to enter. And of course, trade continues almost unabated.
I suppose that we shall have to wait and see what kind of chaos, if any, it does cause. Jonathan List, let me bring you in. You still believe there is the potential for a deal?
Absolutely, because it's vastly in the interest of both sides that there should be a deal. And Boris Johnson knows the economic devastation which arise from having no deal. Contrary to what Robert says, there's absolutely no way that trade can continue as it has up till now. I mean, that is, forgive me, a ludicrous proposition, because then no countries would bother having trade deals with anyone else. The EU can put in place some limited contingency plans for a certain period of time, but after that,
Robert, your time will come. Hold your horses for just a moment. Let Jonathan continue.
Both sides eventually will have to understand what Brexit means. That the EU has understood what Brexit means from the beginning. As Alex was saying, it means that you have a series of choices. The UK has chosen to be outside the customs union, chosen to be outside the single market, and that involves consequences. So although there can be some contingency plans, eventually the UK will have to accept the consequences of its own actions, and that means significant extra barriers and burdens on its trade flowing into the EU, with big consequences for manufacturers, farmers, all kinds of supply chains and services providers. And that's a decision. This decision that Britain can make, that voters can make. The real problem I have is that people have never been warned about this, and even now.
Look, please. I do not want to go back over the old Brexit arguments. I want to talk about why we got to the point where it is either no deal or a deal. Why it has been left so late. Bear that in mind, and I'm going to go to Alex again, and I'm going to ask you about intransigence. Do you think both sides have been too stubborn?
I think I'm always wary of drawing too many conclusions from the way that negotiations are presented in public, but I think it distills down to one issue, basically. Yeah, it's tempting for many to see this as a game of chicken, to see who will blink first. But in the case of the UK, there has obviously been a political imperative in this, and that Brexit has been presented to the public in terms of we'll make our own laws, we'll be a sovereign nation again, we'll be an independent country again. Now, the problem with striking any type of trade agreement, of course, is that any type of trade agreement by necessity involves a trade-off of sovereignty, because you are, as both negotiating parties are, agreeing to adhere to a common set of rules. So you can't have a trade agreement with anyone unless you are prepared to trade off some aspect of your sovereignty, because you're effectively coming up with some form of joint sovereignty. A trade agreement with the United States, for example, improbable as that may appear now, would involve a trade-off of sovereignty. If you want to have a trade agreement with the US, you're going to have to accept American agricultural produce coming into your country, for example. So on the UK side,
let's throw that one. Let's throw that one at Robert, if we may. If there is some kind of deal, we won't be an entirely sovereign country in the UK.
Well, we wouldn't be if we were signing up to the European Union's deal as it is. The European Union was never actually reconciled to Brexit. They wanted to have a situation.
But that isn't what Alex is suggesting. He's suggesting the trade-offs that come with any kind of deal result in a dilution of your own individuality.
No, because there can be shared dispute mechanisms where if there's a disagreement between two trading partners in a trade agreement, then they can find a way of resolving those problems. They'll sit down and discuss or have an accepted measure of arbitration if indeed there's any activity such as state aid or unfair competition being put in place, which would nullify perhaps or undermine the terms of the trade agreement. The difference with what the European Union is asking is they're saying that they will be judge and jury if indeed there is any intransigence or any infringement of the terms of the trade agreement.
Well,
that is not
as I understand it, one of the sticking points at the moment is exactly how this arbitration system would work, whether it kicked in immediately or whether it took some time, that the European Union would not be the one to be the judge and jury on this. It would be a different panel altogether. Jonathan, sovereignty diluted, that's not your real concern, is it?
Well, I don't think that it's true, because sovereignty, as we've said, involves all kinds of trade-offs. I mean, take fishing, for example, which is one of the big outstanding contentious issues still to be resolved. Now, we have, for example, been a sovereign state for the last 47 years since we've been in the EU, and many of the quotas that people argue about were sold off by British people. But leave that to one side. The fish that we catch, we export to the EU because there's no British market for the kinds of fish that exist in our waters. So it's all very well to say that we want control of our waters, but what are we going to do with that control? What you're really saying is we want to give fishers the right to catch fish that British people don't eat. So what kind of sovereignty is that? We need to talk about the lived experiences of people, what the actual bread and butter issues.
It's called flogging it to somebody, whereby you can make a better living than you're doing at the moment. And if you want to sell it to the European Union, deal or no deal, stuff will still go there, and you get a better price for it, and you've got more of it. Then you're going to be better off, aren't you? That's the argument.
Well, I mean, obviously, but everything is a trade-off. That's entirely the point. Everything is a trade-off exactly along the lines that you just outlined. Is it best to have control with tariffs or what have you? The problem is that the debate at the moment is being conducted on absolutist terms, where Britain wants total sovereignty and isn't really prepared to have a conversation about the trade-offs that will emerge from that.
Alex, let me come to you and quote something from the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey talking to Parliament. He said the long-term effects, that is, of a no-deal Brexit, would be larger than the long-term effect of COVID. It takes a much longer period of time for what I call the real side of the economy to adjust to that change. Do you think the price that the UK is paying, and I'm not asking for a partisan, but merely a practical point of view, could be twice the cost of COVID?
Yes, I do. I mean, COVID's clearly been a large exogenous shock to the economy, but whilst the effects have been severe, we can expect the economy to rebound because, of course, the closures that were induced by COVID were that have been affected hospitality, face-to-face retail of non-essential items, leisure services, and so on. Yeah, whilst the impact there has been severe, we can expect them to recover as the economy would pick up with restrictions being loosened. But Brexit entails a different kind of adjustment because if you move to a framework whereby you now have tariffs in place, well, if there's no deal, you then get tariffs in place. Even with a deal, you still have the introduction of new checks in the form of customs declarations, sanitary and phytosanitary checks. These will have a direct cost of business over time. And depending on the profitability of producing in the UK relative to the supply chain disruption that will cause, that may see a refund.
By your calculations, how long might it take, Alex? How long might it take for the UK to be, if you like, on the profit side of the ledger once more?
It's difficult to say that with precision, but if we look at the UK government's own modelling of the impacts of Brexit in the long term, and I think here's where all the talk of deal versus no deal obfuscates from the reality. Yeah, their modelling suggests that with a no deal, the UK economy would be about 7.5% worse off than it would have been staying in the EU over 15 years. But whereas with a deal of the sort that is being currently negotiated, the UK economy would be about 5.5% worse off than it would have been staying in the EU. So there's your sort of tangible impact of Brexit over the longer term, such as automotive shift their production and investment plans accordingly.
Okay, so Robert, 53 billion one estimate for where the UK might be out of pocket next year. How long do you think before it gets that back and the rest?
Well, ever since the referendum, we've been enjoying the Brexit boom until, of course, the COVID situation came along and the government enforced lockdowns, which really did destroy the
Well, that
economy.
was
Which
about
hopefully,
2 months, wasn't it? Because we had COVID in February and we left the European Union in January. So
yes,
not much of a
ever
sample to
since
base a statement like that on.
we've been in the European Union as a result of the referendum, Britain's employment grew, its unemployment fell, its foreign direct investment increased, interest rates increased, the government debt or the government deficit decreased, got back on balance. All the economic indicators were actually ones of growth and ones of success. Inflation remained low. Every single thing that the Remainers said about all these dire consequences, their Project Fear, turned out to be not only incorrect, not only false, but also the exact reverse was true. We believe that the
Okay,
British
I have heard these arguments before,
economy.
and I did stop Jonathan from going into the historical details of Brexit. I know you're talking about something fairly recent, but let me ask you this: when do you think you personally will notice the benefits of Brexit if there is no deal?
Well, it's not so much about what one individual person would benefit
But
from,
that's
but
my
ultimately,
question. That's my question. If you think it's better for the country, better for you, when do you think you'll notice the
it's better for
pluses?
the country. This is how many Eurosceptics think. They do indeed believe they are acting in the best interests of the country and are thinking about their communities, putting them first before other countries.
Well, you're a
That's
member
really,
of a community. It's a dead straightforward question. When do you think you'll notice the benefits?
well, I've been campaigning for Brexit for now 2 decades. Whether when Brexit is complete, I'm going to have to look towards other things. So whether I personally get a Brexit or not is a benefit from it is indeed another matter. In fact, it could indeed be completely the opposite. When, of course, one has built their whole career around pushing for this, which I've been working for now since 2001, and hopefully,
Okay. So what you're saying is, you're saying you can't quantify it, and secondly, you're saying you may well be out of work because there's no more work to do. At least that's what I'm guessing. So, Jonathan, let me come to you. Where do you think it goes from here?
Well, the fact of the matter is that on the 1st of January, there will be changes and they're not going to be for the better. And a lot of people will get very, very angry about that because they were never given the choice of increased sovereignty or, sort of, or economic pain, if you like. It was always the case that everything would improve. The fundamental point is that for the last 4 years, any economic changes have happened, and I would argue that they've been a lot less rosy than the ones Robert is suggesting. But anything that's happened in the economy has been within the economic instruments of the European Union. So we are now finally exiting those economic instruments, and by every economist pretty much agrees that things are going to get
I'm
very,
sorry if you might have misunderstood me. I really mean what happens next in terms of the people talking about leaving, not the effects
Oh, I see.
on us.
What happens to? Well, I'm sure that politically, the people who argued for this will continue to defend their decision. I think that things might get very difficult for the government if they are not able to blame the EU and Remainers for the things that go wrong. And my fundamental point, I suppose, is that people, when things get bad, will want someone to blame. And the EU is not going to be on a future ballot paper, but the Conservative government will be.
Robert, I'll come to you in just a moment. But Alex, do you think, since it's been brought up just now, do you think both sides have been playing to the gallery, talking about worst case scenarios simply so that they can say at the end of the day, look, we did everything we could. Like when it comes to elections in Germany next year, new chancellor, the year after that, new French president, Boris Johnson fighting for his political life. Are we seeing countries playing politics rather than being practical?
I mean, there is a certain element, as you put it, of playing to the gallery. Yes, I mean, for Boris Johnson, this is a very acute dilemma. Does he bow to the economic reality that departing the EU with no trade agreement in place would bring in terms of the disruption due to tariffs and so on? Or does he come back to the political imperative? I mean, it's a very delicate balancing game for him because he has to appease his own party, and of course, in the form of Nigel Farage, on his right wing, lapping at his heels, he'll be very mindful that any agreement, should he reach one with Brussels, isn't seen to compromise on the central Brexit notion of freedom to make our own laws. I mean, that's a very tricky one for him, and I think for him
equally,
it will
is
whether
it
he can sell
possible?
that or not.
Is it possible that the EU is imposing these last minute, some would say, changes, making it more and more difficult for the UK to accept as a form of preemptive punishment to show other European nations that you really don't want to start thinking about quitting this club? Look how difficult it's been for the UK.
Oh yeah, without necessarily trying to say that is a conscious agenda for the EU, there is certainly a political imperative there that what you don't want for a country leaving the club is for that country to be seen deriving any of the particular benefits of membership without having to play by any of the rules. So there is certainly a sense there of that. But for the EU, bear in mind that this isn't a game of chicken. This is existential. I mean, its overriding concern above all else will be to protect what it regards as the integrity of its single market. So if it strikes a trade agreement with a large geographically proximate neighbour, that accords that neighbour some room to wriggle in future to undercut those standards in the single market, then that's going to be a problem for it. And then that would send a clear message to other recalcitrants, still members of the EU, that hey, maybe they can make noise as well. And of course, the EU is not without problems in that regard either. I mean, it's trying to get a stimulus package through that all 27 will agree on, and it's got Hungary and Poland playing hardball because the EU is trying to uphold
it has issues of its own when it comes to those particular finances. Alex, I'm going to move to Robert now, and just first of all, there was something you wanted to say when Jonathan was talking, so finish that off if you don't mind, and then I'll come in with another question.
Well, Jonathan is just reiterating Project Fear and is all gloom and not looking at the positives and the opportunities that Britain has once we're outside.
Okay, sorry, I didn't realise you wanted to beat the Brexit drum again. My question to you is, when do you think we'll get this settled?
The government has signed around the world, a far bigger market in terms of population than the European Union. The opportunities are enormous outside the European Union, and the European Union arguing that they have to protect the integrity of the single market and have some level playing field.
Boris Johnson, I'm going to stop you again because I don't want to hear this Brexit propaganda or the anti-Brexit propaganda from either you or Jonathan. I want to talk about the future. Robert, hold it just there for a moment, if you wouldn't mind. I'm going to go to Jonathan and say, when do you think we will know something definite about the future of both the UK and the European Union? Forget the Brexit politicking. What about the practical side?
Well, it's very hard to say because there was a deadline on Sunday, which both sides had agreed to, and which was missed, partly because neither side wants to put the phone down, as it were, and risk being blamed to the consequences, and partly because, as Boris Johnson said, while there's time, there's hope, and we still have, 2 weeks. It's certainly not ideal, and we've had, 4.5 years in which to get this sorted. It hasn't happened, but the only concrete deadline is the 31st of December, after which there will need to be something in place or nothing in place. And so technically the two sides can talk for 2 more weeks, but there will have to be a decision made by the European Council to decide if there's a deal.
We've got about 90 seconds left. I'm going to go back to Robert. I had to interrupt you there. No more Brexit politicking. Do you think something positive can come out of this, still will come out of this, from your point of view?
Well, I'm sure there will be a deal. Whether it's actually what we want or the British people voted for, a full Brexit, is indeed another matter. I think it's actually quite likely they might extend the transition period by perhaps just another month to continue exploring avenues. And I think ultimately there will be an agreement, and a lot of the talk about no deal, that's actually really a lot of theatre, which is typical of the European Union and no doubt Britain as well, where they want to make the deal seem better than what it actually is by making them seem like they've really been fighting really hard.
Well, that's the same with politicians everywhere, always has been, always will be, I guess. Thank you very much indeed. Alex, have a chance for a final word with you. I know you did tell me beforehand that you may have to rename your department, change it from the Centre for Brexit Studies to the Centre for Transition Studies. Good luck with that, and thank you, each and every one of you, for coming on the programme. Can I wish you a prosperous, if complicated, 2021? And wherever you happen to be watching this programme, we appreciate the time that you put into it. I hope you've enjoyed this roundtable. Come back for more. From me, David Foster, and the team. Goodbye for now.